So, hello again. I don't know why I was so serious. And so today we will try to bust the myth if every project needs to be automated or not. But we usually, as testers, we always think that every project needs to be automated. And we always look at the technical part of the project. And today we will try to look also at the technical part of the project, but also from a business point of view. And we will try to follow some facts to see if we can bust the myth or not. So in the beginning, I will take a case. It's actually a project that I have been working on to just have an example. So the owner of an assurance multinational company recently hired the QA automation team to automate their new mobile application. And the two applications are one on Android and one on iOS. The functionality is the same on both of the applications, and the apps are still in development. The client is waiting for a response regarding the implementation of the project, and no contract was signed yet. The question is, how will you implement the automation testing process? You will search for the internet for some automation tools, you will look what programming language you should use, and then we will start to create a prototype, to give a prototype to the client or to give him a response regarding the project. But is that okay? Is our decision mature enough? What question may arise if we will do it this way? Do you think, do we have a process? Does the team have a process? How do we select the right tool? Do we need to integrate the project with other tools, with continuous integration, or with test management tool? Do we need to allocate budget to buy the software? Are the tests maintainable, the tests that we wrote on our prototype? How much time do we need to automate the manual test? Do we need to use a test management tool to integrate the tests in the test management tool? How will we track the defects? Do we have enough resources in our team? When and how do we start? When do we start the automation, actually? So let's take the first question, how to choose the testing framework. So we have a lot of testing frameworks, as we've mentioned yesterday in his presentation. And at first, for the project, when I started to look for the test automation framework, it was very difficult because I didn't know what to use. So actually, this was my reaction. It was, okay, now I need to research what I need to use, and it actually took me more than a few hours that I thought. It took me like 3 days because I didn't know anything about it. Let's take the example again. So we have two applications, one on Android and one on iOS, and the functionality is the same on both of the applications. So which framework do we need to choose and why? The first thing that we need to look at when we choose a testing framework, if it's the testing framework, it's stable. It's one of the most important things because there are many testing frameworks on the market now, and they are not stable, they have a lot of defects, so you always need to contact the team if it's an open source one, to say if they can fix the defect, or if you can fix the defect by yourself, it's fine, but usually you need to contact them. So in the examples that I showed, which would be the best tool to use? If it's an application that runs both on Android and on iOS, you don't want to have redundant code, so then it's better to choose an application that works for automating both on iOS and both on Android. So probably you will choose Appium or Calabash, but if you think which of them is stable, or if you need to change something, for example, for Calabash, since April last year, the Xamarin has no support for the testing framework, so it would be like wise not to choose that one and choose Appium. But if you would have a project just on iOS, it would be better to choose Xcode to do your test. And if you have, for example, an application that is just on Android, it's not okay to choose Appium, and it would be a better decision to choose, for example, Espresso. And how to choose the language? That would be the next question. So I chose 4 things by which I would choose the language, and I think that they are important. Well, the first one is the tester's knowledge. If you have a team of 3 testers, it's very important that all of them know the same programming language, or if not, most of them know, or if it's important to also know that. And also the project's programming language, because the developers can help you, and then you can build a better relationship with the developers and communicate more. So that's also important. Then the third one is the community, that it's bigger. So in this case, for example, for Java, if you take the example of automating the UI, for Java you have 68% of people in the community, for JavaScript 50%, Python 11%. It's not very important to look at it, but it is important because when you feel alone and you feel like you don't know anything and you don't know how to implement something, then you can always ask for help. And the fourth, which I think is also important, it's to run tests in parallel. If it's easy, if you choose that programming language, to run the tests in parallel. For example, for me, Python, it's very easy to choose because then you can run it with the XDist library, and it's very fast, and you don't need to configure a lot. You just actually need to install the library. Going on, it's also, we don't think about this, but the infrastructure within your company, it's also important. For the project that we worked on, the Appium project, we did a diagram, this diagram which shows how we integrated our tool within the infrastructure, but you also need to think about what continuous integration you would use. So if you use Bamboo, or for example, if you use a simulator or devices, will you have like real devices within your own company, or will you use cloud? Will you use, for example, Sauce Labs or Device Farm? So the first fact is that you have to think about the test framework, the programming language, and the infrastructure. But there is more than one type of automation testing. I've talked a lot about UI automation testing. I know many people at this conference presented the testing pyramid, which I also think is very important because it shows the return of investment of your automation process. So the ideal testing pyramid, it's having automating more unit tests because they are very quick, and then automating the integration tests, and after that the UI tests. Why? Because the UI tests are very slow. So the best decision that you can take is just to have a set of smoke tests or a sanity, which are very high and critical tests implemented in the UI. But I have the talk yesterday with Arnon, and he said that maybe it's wrong to see it this way. For example, to implement the unit tests, and don't think that maybe you put more effort into doing the end-to-end test or the integration test. So I agreed with the decision that indeed sometimes you will put more effort to do your integration test than to do your unit test. And also it's important to see the anti-pattern. So it's, if you have a project and in your project you automate a lot of UI tests, it will take a lot of time. Maybe they will be flaky, or we will have a lot of false positive or false negative tests. So it's not a good decision to choose that pattern. And I know it's very difficult when we work in teams to work with developers and take into account the importance of the ideal pyramid. So fact 2 is that automation is done at 3 levels. Why do we automate? Because we want to automate complex web applications, we want to quickly run our critical and high priority tests, we want to quickly run tests that need to be executed on multiple configurations, we also want to eliminate the regression tests, we want to automate tests that are prone to human error, we want to automate data-driven tests, we want to increase the testing coverage, and also decrease the costs. So the third fact is that we need to get quicker results and save money and time. And I, as a tester, I don't think about the fact that we need to save money and time sometimes, but it's a very important thing to think about. That's the main reason why you want to automate, to get faster results, make your tests run faster, and to find defects faster in your project. If you need to automate a web application, you need to have some unit tests that are integrated in the CI, and then the integration tests, so you can run them every time after a version is increasing. So after every time you deploy your version, you need to run the tests, and they will give you like faster results that you have, nothing has changed in your application and everything is working properly. But the main point in this case is that you need to save money and time. So how do you decide to automate or not? When do you take this decision? The success in test automation is just planning and design work. And this exactly like, you can think about it like a plan when escaping the prison. You need like a good plan to escape the prison. So you need a good plan when you want to have a successful test automation project. I know this is a difficult graphic, and it was one graphic that we did for the automation project with Appium. What we took into account are the number of tests that we had, then the number of tests that can be automated, and we took the percentage of tests that can be automated, that cannot be automated, then we had the tests that can be automated, and we did a priority number of the tests which we need to automate. And we put it in a graphic, and the graphic looked like this, like in how many months we would take all the tests by the component to automate. And actually, I just wanted to say that this was the wrong decision to do it, because at that moment I wasn't experienced enough, and I didn't thought that actually we don't need to automate everything in UI, and because we will have like slower results. So it was wrong to do it this way. We should have thought just about taking some set, as I said, of smoke tests and sanity tests, and just focus on that. So we will have like faster results, and we will be very efficient. So this was the risk that we had with our automation project. At that time, for example, Appium was new and there was still a lot of defects and it may not be stable. We didn't have in our automation projects any IDs for the Android application or any tags for the iOS application. So that was also very difficult because we needed to use the XPaths and it was very slow. So then we had to take into account to put in the project the time the developers need to put some IDs for the important components, and also on iOS the developers' time they need to put the tags in the project for the important components. And also a risk was that the team needed time for analysis and research while developing. So it's very important when you do an automation project to take into account the risks that you would have. In the end, this was actually the planning that we did for the automation project. We had per month, and actually every month which task we need to do. At the beginning, the developers needed to put the tags, so we needed to take into account the developer's time, the developer on Android, the developer on iOS. We needed to take into account that actually the team was formed of 3 people, but just the two of them were experienced but not seniors, and one of them had no experience with automation testing, so we also needed to take into account that that person will need some trainings. And then we established that in the next 3 months we will integrate the infrastructure of the project, and then we estimated that for the next 19 months, 1 year, we will still develop the UI tests for the project. And then we will have to do maintenance, which is again very important because you need to update all the packages all the time, and maybe some new changes will be implemented, and then you will have to change something in your project. So fact 4 is that you need to think about is to start by doing a thorough analysis. So advantages. What are the advantages of the test automation? The advantage is that the testers get motivated. Why? Because you may say, okay, but I'm not an automation engineer and I don't really enjoy doing that. So I don't really enjoy doing that. And but actually, it's very challenging just to find out about these tools and to do a research and then to start to learn a little bit of code. And in the end, it can be fun. So then you get motivated to do more. You get fast information about the defects introduced by changes, and you get quick feedback. Quick feedback, I mean when you think about the unit tests and the integration tests. That's when you get the quicker feedback. And it also frees up the time of the testers. So you don't have to focus on some boring tasks, some repeatable tasks that you do every day, and you can focus on doing something else like test planning or doing a test strategy for your project. And the development team can contribute, which means that you build stronger relationship with your with the colleagues, with the developers. So which are the disadvantages of automation testing? I know many people already talked about this, but it's important to repeat them, that you have the false sense of quality, that the test that may pass may not always be correct. So you may have false positive or false negative tests, and you also may have flaky tests, which are tests that fail or pass on the same configuration. So the false positive tests are the tests that will always pass, for example, but in the end you will have a defect in that test, so that's a false positive test. And the flaky tests are the tests which sometimes pass and sometimes fail. So again, a disadvantage of automation is the maintenance time and effort, because you need to update the packages always. And it's a very difficult task. When you need to take, for example, when you use Python, it's very easy because you just need to do an update with the command line. But if, for example, you use Java, then sometimes it's more difficult because you need to look at all the libraries and sometimes update them manually, because you need to look also if the library is stable or not. You cannot use a library that it's not stable. And we had that problem. We used the library that wasn't stable, and then we didn't know why some of the tests failed. And we needed to research again, and then we found the problem with the library. We just wrote we wrote a comment to the support team to fix that problem, and we needed to switch back to the old version of the library. And of course, the disadvantage is the slow feedback, because automated tests can take a long time to script. So it's not just they take a long time to script, but sometimes when you develop UI tests, for example, you need to use timers. And it may be, in some cases, that the timers that you use are not correct. And it takes really a long time for the test to run. And maybe at some point the test just get blocked, so you cannot actually move on. And another disadvantage is that not many bugs are found. It may happen that you develop the test, but actually you don't find a lot of bugs. So fact 5, that I like it very much and it's really, really important, is that test automation, when done correctly, can have many advantages and be very beneficial. But it's very important to do it correctly. And I want to mention here my favorite project. Actually, my favorite project was working in a cross-functional team, and we worked in a TDD manner. We had developers and QA testers working together. The project was, so we didn't need to run a lot of manual testing on the project, just like 5%. And how did it work? It was developers started writing the unit test, and then while the developers the developers implemented the feature, then they started to write the unit test. While the developers started to run the unit test, we as testers, we started to run the integration and the end-to-end test. And then they were reviewed by the developer, and we communicated together if we need some more tests, or if not, or if the unit tests are enough. We also checked the testing coverage. And after that, after one component was implemented, then the testers, we did the UI test, which included just some really critical tests like smoke tests for the project. And the project was written in Python, so it made it like more easier. It was not an MVC framework. It's called MVT because you use templates instead of controllers, and it was like very easy to work on it as a team. When you use, for example, Java or sometimes C#, indeed it's more difficult to work as a team because you have many APIs that are integrated in the system, so it becomes very difficult. But how about the automation in the software development lifecycle models? One of the important questions when starting an automation project is to think, okay, we are doing the automation, we have a process, we have an infrastructure, we have everything, but then when do we start the project, and how do we start the project? And many companies work with different methodologies. I know that most of us, we work with Agile. We don't work with Waterfall or V-model. But for example, if you have the Waterfall model, most probably you will start your automation testing after the project is almost completely done, like 80% of the project. If you would use the V-model, you will start doing automation testing at the same time that developers are implementing the project. If you would use the prototype, then in this case, for example, developers are doing the prototype, so you start doing a prototype of yourself of a test automation framework. And then in the Agile, there's also a difference, because nowadays we have so many Agile methodologies that we cannot keep up with. Even Spotify has its own Agile methodology. So in this case, how do you integrate your automation testing process in in the team. If you work with Scrum, and if you work with Kanban, there are also, again, two different things. When you work with Kanban, you deploy after every sprint, but when you work with Scrum, you deploy, actually you have sprints, but you deploy just after 6 months. So in this case, when do you start the automation? You would start it at the same time when you develop. But anyway, the most important thing of when to start automation is actually when you are developing, because that's the purpose of automation, to find out if your code it's viable and if it's good or if it has defects. So the most important thing, you cannot, I mean, you can, but it won't be so, the automation won't be so beneficial if you start automating after your project is done. So the most important thing is actually to start automation when you start the project. And then, how about the automation process? And what I want to say what I want to say with automation process is actually the automation process within your team. So you have a team of developers and testers, but how do you do it? Do you do, for example, TDD? Do you use BDD? And how do you code review your task? How do you commit? Do you establish some style conventions within your own team? And you also use the style conventions, for example, PEP 8 or the Oracle style conventions from Java. You also need, at the beginning, when you start the automation process, you need to have a meeting with your team and discuss about how you will implement the entire process and which style guidelines you will use if you will do your own. And it's very important to establish this before starting the project. And also, how do you work on tasks? Okay, we have a board, but how do we work on that task, which is actually the best approach? And I want to say that there is no best approach. The best approach is actually the approach that you establish with your team, because every team is working differently. But probably it will be good to have some tasks on the board when you start the feature, to have some feature tasks, then to have the developer to have the unit task, then the QA to have the integration task, and everybody should do the code review. I mean, testers also can do the code review for the unit tests, and it's actually better, it helps. Maybe we don't think about it, and sometimes we think that, okay, but I don't know a lot. It doesn't matter. Sometimes developers just miss like basic things about the style guidelines. And it's also important for you to do it, and it's also important for you to get the feedback from the developers. So, and another thing that it's very important is the future of automation. So it's the future of automation. What does that mean? It means the rise of the open source tools, big data testing. Some people say that even QA as a service. So it says that some companies will just put the QA, instead of having testers, they will just give it as a service. And one of the most important topics that everybody is talking about now, it's the third wave. That what will happen with artificial intelligence in testing. I don't know if you were yesterday at the discussion panel, but I've tried one of the AI tools, and actually what it did, it has an algorithm that takes the object and all the selectors of the object, so it identifies the object based on all the selectors. And if you make a change in the, for example, you have a web application and you make a change in the web application, the AI tool will if you write a test, then the AI tool will pass the test, even if you change some of the identifiers. Why? Because it will look for all the identifiers that that it took into account. And also it will try to analyze if your test if your test, when it fails because there was a change or there was a defect. So this thing was not yet implemented, but they say they will implement it. And actually, I tested when you have just one element. If you change one element, then indeed the automation tool figures the test will pass, and it will figure out that it was changed because of a new feature. But if you change two objects in the application, then the AI won't two objects of the same type in the application. For example, you change two buttons, then the AI won't notice, will fail the test because it won't find the object. And the most important thing of the future of automation and your current project is if your project will be deprecated, or if you will need to integrate your project with other tools. You just need to think about to take this into account also, because the future trends can affect your project on the long run. So maybe just think about how you can integrate that in your project if your project is ongoing. And the business behind the project. So we did a project, we are very proud of it, and then the business just came, the business just is going to say, well, it's not fine. But why? Because you didn't took into account that you may be working in an outsourcing company, or you may be working on a product company. The client that you work on, that you work with, may be an old client or a new client. If you are working with an old client, then you can suggest more things for automation because they will be very open. But when you are working with a new client, it's very difficult because they will say, okay, there's no time and there's no need to automate. And then, as we've said yesterday, and I really like it, it was like you are in the continuous loop. Like you say you cannot automate, and then because there's no time, but you have no time because you don't automate, and you just go on. So it's very difficult to interact with clients and just convince them that automation is good. And a very important thing is if you have a contract or not. One of the projects that I've worked on, my manager asked me to do an analysis for an automation project, and he said to me specifically that you just need to know that the contract was not signed with the client. And I said, okay, what does that mean? I'm just a tester, I don't know that. But that meant actually that you need to be careful what you say and how to manage the client, to explain the automation time and budget, because maybe he won't sign with you. And also time versus budget and quality versus quantity. So there are some clients that want quality, there are some clients that want quantity. Why? Because if you have on the market two businesses that they have the same product, which will win? The first one that we will get the product on the market. So one of the businesses will be focused on quality and one of the businesses will be focused on quantity. So the business will be focused on quantity, will release the first one, because the business will be focused on quality, they will have a lot of work. And then the business who is focused on quantity will win. So sometimes you need to take into account the fact that quality for the clients is not so important. So to sum up all the things that you need to take into account when automating a project is that if you have a complex system, the infrastructure within the company, also very important if you don't have open source tools, because then the business needs to pay for them. The ideal test automation pyramid, the budget, the team and the knowledge, very important. The time, the methodology that you use to think about the test automation process, the future trends, and then to think about the business behind the project. So I'll quickly go through a case. It's another project that I have been working on. It's an outsourcing company, is working on a project for a public broadcasting service provider. And the projects consist in websites that manage the content of the front-end and back-end application. All the infrastructure is within the outsourcing company. The client is an old client with a contract that was signed for the next 3 years. The team is formed of skilled technical individuals, and the team is working with the Kanban methodology. There are some words here that are outlined, which are important to think about. And why did I choose a case? Because your manager will come at you, and then he will just ask, look, this is the thing that you have to think about it. Just give me an answer in 1 or 2 days. And you would say, it's impossible to give you an answer in 1 or 2 days because I need to do an analysis. I need to see how much we need to automate. If we have some automation currently on the project, for example, on the developer side, if you have some unit tests. And then it's just an example to look at the context and just take a decision based on the context. So you are an outsourcing company, but it's very important that the infrastructure is within your company. So it's very easy to work on. You have an old client, which means that you can be very permissive. And then you have a contract that was already signed. And you have a team of skilled individuals. And you are working with the Kanban methodology, which means that you will release, as I said, at every sprint. So in this case, you may choose, for example, a TDD approach, and you will just start to automate the project. And the next case, it's a product company. It's also one of the projects that I worked on. It's a product company which is working on a new project, and the application needs to be available as the first application in the case on Android and iOS. The team is formed of skilled automation testers, manual testers, devs, business analysts, product owner, UX designer, and the manager. A prototype was designed, and the management decided to go on with the product. And the business and the management are not technical individuals. There is no timeline in finishing the project, just to deliver the project with the basic functionality in 10 months. The team is working with the Scrum methodology. What things are important to take into account here? It's that it's a product company. You have the application both on Android and iOS. You have skilled automation testers. You have a prototype, but the business and the management are not technical individuals. There is a time to finish the project, but the basic functionality needs to be delivered in 10 months. So it's important that you are a product company, because then again you are more permissive with what you do, because you work within the product company. The application is both on Android and on iOS, so you would choose a tool, for example, like Appium, and then the business and management are not technical individuals, then you would choose maybe BDD, because then when they see the reports, they can figure it out what is actually happening with your project. So you would say to your manager, yeah, okay, we may do that. We will do we can choose the testing framework, Appium, we can do the BDD because our team is not so skilled, so they won't understand. And then the third case, it's an outsourcing company that receives a small project to implement a mobile application for a gym, which is both on Android and on iOS, but the client will take care of maintenance. So you just do the project, and then you will give the project to the company to take care of it. And they need the application to be ready ASAP. So a contract was signed for 6 months. The team is working with Scrum. And you have 3 developers and just a QA mid-automation engineer. So what would you do in this case? In this case, it's better not to do automation at all, because you just need to finish the application, and then you just need to deliver it. And anyway, you cannot do automation because you cannot have the resources, and you cannot ask for the resources. So, because we don't have enough time, and I would have talked more, I hope we busted the myth that not every project needs to be automated. And I want to thank you all, because for me it takes superpowers to be a QA engineer and to do all the things that you do. So thank you.